Welcome to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Amanda Krugliak, curator of the Institute for the Humanities Gallery. Today, we come to you direct from the gallery, where currently we are hosting the work of Shizu Saldamando, and we invite all of you in the local area to experience this show in person. LA-based artist Shizu Saldamando defies imposed norms and expectations as to the social constructs of individual and collective cultural identity. Her practice is informed by hip-hop, punk rock, and the post-punk era. Her deep roots in the Latinx artist and queer club scene of LA is as integral to her work as her family's history of incarceration in Japanese internment camps in the US during World War II. Saldamando creates modern portraits of familiar people who define and inhabit their own spaces, broadening the conversation as to who belongs in institutional art spaces and who creates culture. Each work feels up close and personal, honoring family, friends, and peers. Incorporating wood, handmade paper, glitter, and gold leaf, she embraces the traditions of craft making. And now, let's meet Shizu Saldamando to learn more about her practice.
Hi, I'm Shizu. Welcome to my artist talk. I'm here at the University of Michigan. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. So I'm going to start off with a piece I did in undergrad that's always really strong to my heart. This is a portrait of my grandmother, a video portrait of her. This was for a class I had at the UCLA Department of Art for Alan Rupersberg's video class or installation kind of class. So I got into UCLA directly from high school. I grew up in the Mission District in San Francisco, and it was a severe culture shock for me coming from the Mission District in the 90s to UCLA Westwood. And my grandmother lived in the Sawtelle area close by, so I was spending a lot more time with her at the time. And when Alan passed out these VHS cassettes for us to do something with, one of them was a Japanese soap opera. So I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I wanted to ask my grandmother to translate it for me, since a lot of the time we spent together was her translating her Japanese TV to me. And my mom is Japanese American. Her family was interned in the internment camps. And my dad is Mexican American Chicano from Nogales, Arizona, which is a border town in Arizona. And so there is a sort of disconnect because I don't speak any Japanese, neither does my mom or her siblings, because they went through the internment camps during World War II. But my grandmother just felt more comfortable speaking Japanese, even though she was born and raised in Boyle Heights. So she translated this for me, and I videotaped her sitting on the couch translating what was going on. And I played one of the channels on the TV and then recorded her on the projection. And I tried to create another sort of virtual living room, the experience you would feel when you were there with her. And so this was one of the first pieces I did as an undergrad, one of the first art pieces I think I've ever done, where it was very close to my heart and a sincere art piece, and not just to fulfill a class assignment. And so this piece was sort of the beginning of all the rest of my work, which was portraiture-based, of people that I really admire, love, and care about, and want to share their story or my experience with them. So when I was in high school, me and my friends would buy old Teen Angel magazines, and Teen Angel magazines were kind of like these cholo prison art magazines, and they had incredible detailed portraits of cholos, Chicano culture scenes, I guess, of a lot of lowriders, men with big mustaches, Aztec-like imagery, calendar art. And we would try to copy these drawings. And there were these intricate ballpoint pen drawings, and we did our best to try to recreate the cursive, the detail in the drawing and the shading. And so ballpoint pen drawing on cloth was something that was just one of the first sort of art practices that I saw and was exposed to and really tried to emulate. So the prison art that that was featured in this magazine, Teen Angels, was sort of during the 90s, because that's when I grew up in the Mission, there's a lot of prison art and prison culture and gang culture around in the neighborhood. And that was just part of what we were exposed to as a viable and really attainable art practice. And it was really accessible to, like, people's cousins were in jail and they would come send them envelopes with just intricate drawn art on them. So that was sort of a really big influence on me. So when I was in school, we were asked to do work, different drawings on different substrates, not just paper. And I thought, oh, I wanted to try doing these handkerchief drawings again. That was in reference to prison art. But also because I didn't have a direct reference, like none of my family was directly in San Quentin at the time, even though I did have family in prison during World War II for the Japanese American incarceration camps. There was sort of this weird disconnect. So I did portraits of my friends. And so this is a portrait of Pancho, my good friend's boyfriend's friend at the time, wearing a damn t-shirt. And they were all just the kids that we would hang out with in my 20s in college. And I would get these weird reads too about the handkerchief pieces. Like, why are you doing these works on napkins? Or there was like a cultural sort of culture shock or like something lost in translation with those two. So when I was in graduate school, there was this read that somehow that the work was problematic because I was featuring people of color that were like non-white people. And the predominant audience at the school was white. And so I was creating otherized portraits, and therefore the work itself was just like problematic or somehow otherizing. Even though myself, I don't identify as being white, there was still that read from from my classmates, who a lot of them were not from LA, or San Francisco or California for that matter. So I decided to do a series of portraits of people looking at art. And I had come from working at Self-Help Graphics during my entire undergrad as an intern and work study student. And Self-Help Graphics is a Chicano art center in the heart of East Los Angeles, which is a predominantly Mexican-American community. And so Self-Help Graphics, a lot of the galleries around there and in the Mission District were Chicano art centers. And so they catered to a predominantly Latinx and Chicano art audience. So I did not have that read that only white people were the purveyors of audiences or that went to museums. That was not my experience. Like, my experience were Chicanos, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans created a lot of art and showed a lot of art at different galleries and had an audience that was reflective of their art itself. So I took my camera and I went to different art exhibitions around LA and asked my friends to pose for me as if they were looking at an art piece. And my series was called Looking at Art. And it was meant to critique this idea that only white people were purveyors of high art, and to create this reflective relationship about looking back at the viewer and being commodified as a piece of art, but being conscious of that read and having a stance and a look that resisted that. So this piece were all like over life-size ballpoint pen drawings on canvas instead of handkerchiefs as a way to reference the fine art of canvas painting, but also to keep true to the idea of an accessible object such as a ballpoint pen. So the ballpoint pen and the portrait and on the canvas, not handkerchief, had these different layers of history and context, but also fundamentally trying to critique historical notions of painting and portraiture. And so this was a piece called Sony Looking at Art. And this was her posing. This is Sony, one of my classmates, who is actually Korean, but living in Japan, a Japanese Korean, which has its own set of complications and experience. This is a portrait of my friend Arnold looking at art. And Arnold and me were really good friends at UCLA Art School. And in turn now, he teaches art in Wilmington, where he's from. And this is at another art exhibition. This one was 2 by 4 feet. The first one, Arturo Looking at Art, was about 6 by 4 feet. So they're all supposed to be like life size or larger than life size. So once I graduated from graduate school, I was really kind of frustrated about making art just on a sort of institutional critique level and responding to like a sort of predominantly like mainstream white critique of the work. And I didn't want to create work that did that. And so I really needed to get back to what I was really inspired by in the first place, why I like to create portraiture, what really was a passion in myself about creating that and what that was. So I went back to a dance club. And I was partying a lot. I was going out to music shows, punk shows, backyard parties. So I decided to do portraits of these party scenes because that's where I really had fun. And I felt like I didn't have to explain myself. And there wasn't that institutional critique of my own identity every time I stepped into the room. It wasn't like I was otherized every time I presented my work. It was like I could just exist as this person in this scene and have this connectivity to a lot of friends that were descendants of immigrants themselves and who were Chicano and who were Latinx and who were queer and who enjoyed the same type of music that I did. And so I decided to do these portraits of party scenes, of intimate moments at clubs and dance clubs and music shows as a way to get back to what really was important to me about people and experience. And so I took pictures. When I would go out, I had a little point and shoot camera and I would document my friends hanging out. And I started to do, again, ballpoint pen, but I chose instead of the canvas, which referenced for me painting, historical painting, to use a bed sheet, which had a more domestic reference and a more accessible, sort of intimate reference than a sheet of unstretched or primed canvas. And so this one is called Elvia's Plea. And this is Elvia, my friend Elvia, and her man Caesar at the Transistor nightclub in Chinatown. I think this was Transistor night. My friend DJ'd there. And Cindy, my friend Cindy's in the background. This one is called Ripples Long Beach. And this was taken at a club in Long Beach, a gay club in Long Beach. And this was done on a found bed sheet. So I find a lot of these bed sheets at different thrift stores. Again, with a ballpoint pen. This one is called the Chinatown Series, I think, of the Embrace series, and they were installed on a laundry line. Again, different couples embracing. This one was a documentation of my friend's party, Highland Park Luau, which is a neighborhood in LA, which has been just really gentrified. But this piece was done in 2007, 2006, I believe, back when it wasn't as crazy as it is now. But it's that piece. And this one was re-gold leafed. So this was a found screen, and I re-gold leafed it. There was a bird on a rock, I think, before, and I made this sort of as a way to critique and recontextualize the idea of landscape painting, but made it a party landscape. This is a portrait of my friend's parents. They both passed away, so I didn't really plan on this being a memorial piece, but this was her birthday party. This is called Downey Happy Birthday, and my friends are from Downey, which is an area in LA located between Linwood and Compton, around southeast LA. And a lot of the work that I've done actually is based off of neighborhoods in southeast LA for some reason. Spent a lot of time out there, a lot of different dance clubs around there. But I use collage in this one, a lot more collage than I normally do, as a way to, I guess, complicate the read, because collage and the different papers that you use each have their own content within it. And so it kind of allows you to read the piece in different ways and not just as a strictly portraiture, but also as a craft piece. And this is, I think, maybe a strategy of mine to try to complicate the work so it's not easily like flattened or seen as just like merely identity politics or something, but that there's like a craft reference to talk about domestic space, to talk about craft circle, to talk about crafting the different hierarchies of materials that exist within different art contexts. And this is another one. This is Cindy and Ozma in the bathroom. So again, there's like my friends that keep becoming repeated. Like, so Cindy was in another piece. So I owe a debt of gratitude to my friends who let me exploit their image on the daily basis and base my art career on their image. Thank you, Cindy. This is a portrait of my friend Gerardo. This was taken at a club called the Truck Stop in WeHo. This is a portrait of my friend's ex-girlfriend, Sandy. So yeah, it's like my friends and their exes and their relationships are sort of all like incorporated into the work. And it's really just homage to me and them and the experience I have with them and documenting that. And these are friends and people I hang out with. And I think I'm just really interested in showing a personal account of what my experiences and what my life is through portraiture. And it's not trying to be this outsider, like Larry Clark, kind of like anthropologist of culture sort of thing, but this has just happened to be who I see every day or who I hang out with. And at the time, that's who everybody was. This piece is called Maria Daniela, Azusa, California. So there was a concert of Maria Daniela, who is a minimal electronic artist from Mexico. And she was touring the United States and came to Azusa, of all places, which is this really kind of obscure suburb, maybe like 45 minutes outside of LA. And she had this huge crowd there. And I thought it was really beautiful and just really incredible that there was this huge crowd at this really intimate club that all showed up for her, and the comradeship that we all felt with each other and the connectedness and the releasing of trauma that all these kids from immigrant legacies were there to support Maria and see what she was about. And that's this piece. And this was graphite on wood as well. So, this piece functioned in a similar way. I had a show at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco. And there was a Filipino-American festival happening. At the same time, I went to meet with the curator to talk about the show. And the show was a group show called Audience as Subject. I think she had seen the Maria Daniela piece and wanted to know if I could do some work for the Audience as Subject show. And I thought it was really great to show the audience that was at the Pistahan Fest or the Filipino Fest and document the crowd there, because prior to Yerba Buena Center existing, there was the I Hotel, which was on the same grounds. And the I Hotel was a hotel for agricultural workers to live. And it was predominantly Mexican-American and Filipino-American men who lived there. And so it was sort of bittersweet to have this festival happening, Filipino festival happening on the same grounds as what used to be the I Hotel. And so this kind of talks about gentrification, labor. There's a lot of different issues, I think, that are alive and present in this work. But I also want the viewer to be able to access the work on just a purely visual level as well. So you would not necessarily know that history unless you read the title, which was View from the Second Stage, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Pistahan Fest, AKA the I Hotel. So this piece is a colored pencil drawing of a car that was parked outside my apartment building for a very long time. And I viewed this piece as a sort of car portrait of a portraiture piece, but based on whoever owned this car and would personalize it and customize it to their own personhood and what they're into. And you can kind of look at the car. This piece, I think, is called Notes on la Raza Cosmica, because the car for me sort of looked like an alien spaceship. And also the various stickers and flair that this person put on their car was a very specific idea about who they are, and also functions to me the way fashion functions, or the way you construct your outfit, and different buttons you wear, or the different kinds of, like if you do tattoos, the different tattoos you would get, and just to show like what you're about and to be very proud of what you're about and to identify similar people that are into the same things that you are. And so I might revisit this series in the future too, because I think it's really important to talk about the way people kind of create their own art with what they drive or what they wear. This is a portrait of my friend's nephew, Frank's graduation. And this is a kind of a bittersweet piece because I think it talks about access and what opportunities there are for people in the world and for working class people, people of color, deciding where to go what's the next step after you graduate school. And so for a lot of people, that's the military, or you can join a street gang, or, there's not much difference between the two and how that functions on a larger societal level. And so this is called Frank's graduation. This is a portrait of 3 women that were waiting. This is called In Between Sets, waiting for the band. And this is just a documentation, a photo I took from this punk show where kids were all waiting for the band to start. And this piece was commissioned through this organization who was installing public artwork to be installed on different BART stations. And BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, is the public metro for San Francisco and the Bay Area. And I wanted to pay homage to the different sort of punk scenes that exist in the Bay Area, and to document young women, but in a not a hypersexualized way, which is what we normally see when we ride public transit, and with the advertisements that are on the walls, but just to talk about friendship and being young and hanging out with friends, and being at their level in the photo and in the drawing, respectively, and honoring that space and that connection. This is a portrait of this poor person who is passed out from drinking too much. And there's something really romantic and beautiful and peaceful about his self-medicated state and having that space to sleep and being left alone and people respecting that. And there's something really nice and poetic about it. And that's why I drew it. And it's from the back. So I didn't know this person personally. So I hope that if they ever see this, they don't get mad, but that was them. And this band, In Disgust, I think they're from San Jose, it's a Bay Area hardcore band as well. So the piece was called Backyard Hardcore. This is a portrait of my friend May. And I originally did this piece to be shown at the Smithsonian for their Asian American Portraiture Now exhibition. And we had grown up in the same area in San Francisco, in the same neighborhood, and reconnected because she moved to go to UCLA. So she was in the LA area. And when I was selected to be part of this exhibition, I knew I wanted her face in the exhibition as a representative of Asian American portraiture, because she has an amazing, strong look. But again, being butch and what that entails, and the expectations of the model minority myths surrounding Asian Americans, was one that I didn't want to prescribe to. So she generously let me take her photo and paint it. And this was called May's Post-Breakup because she was dealing with a breakup at the time as well. This is a portrait of Daniel Hernandez and his boyfriend at the time, Uriel, and this was taken in Mexico City. And I used a lot of collage and paper for this piece. This is a portrait of my friend Carm. This is called Carm's Crew, Carm, Angie, and Rocky. And there are 3 women from Downey, California as well. And this actually became the PR poster for the Asian American Portraiture Show, even though there are 3 Latinx Chicana women from Downey. And I thought that was great. And I like how it complicated the read about Asian Americanness and what all that entails. And I think that's because there's the rays in the back of them. And I think the curators might have thought it was more of a reference to Tandoori Yuku or even the imperial flag, which I would never try to recreate ever. But I viewed the rays as more of a Virgin Mary kind of reference, or the Virgin of Guadalupe kind of critique of that, and just showing 3 friends hanging out. This is a portrait of my friend Jerry, La Otra Jerry, who is a great fashion designer, and he's always really tough in all his photos and in life. This is a portrait of my friend Sandra and Tammy, and we had gone to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery to see Cry Baby. And this is a documentation of them watching the movie and on a picnic blanket. So this is a portrait of my friend Joe, who's also featured in the video work outside this exhibition. And Joe is a great muse of mine. I think I've drawn and painted him maybe more than Cindy even. And this is him in my studio, and it's Joe with Grand Legacy, and that's the CVS brand of a whiskey, which I don't recommend anyone ever drink ever, but that's why it's called Joe with Grand Legacy. And it's Grand Legacy without the D, if anyone's actually interested in trying it. This is a portrait of my friend Carlos, aka Kraslos, is his DJ name. And this was taken at, this photo for the drawing was taken at Club Chico, aka Club Scum, which was a punk, Latinx punk night that happened in East LA, a queer club too. And he was double fisting and just looking so forlorn and amazing. And thank you, Carlos, for letting me take your photo in this state. This is Star Montana, who's an amazing photographer and friend. And she's had several shows up recently. I think at this point, I started to do more portraits of friends that were artists. And there's a shift here that you'll notice, because I think when I was first starting out, a lot of my friends weren't other artists. And as I've gotten more successful in my career, I've just had more peers and met more people that are artists. And I find too, as being a mom, it's really hard for me to go out and drink every night and document and be at the club and getting shit-faced and taking the best photos when I am. Like, it's harder for me to do that. I'd probably die if I did that now. But so I actually have to take time to set up lunch dates and backyard hangouts with people to like maybe hang out in my backyard. And especially during the pandemic, I really had to do this, where we spent, and I think this show kind of is the impetus of that relationship and that shift. Not being able to socialize as much and not being able to be in those tight, close circles with bodies pressed against each other watching a show, like having to distance, having to be socially distant. And what does that mean now when you're a portraiture artist or when you're portraiture based, and trying to reconcile all of those things. So this work, there are a lot of artists. So this is a portrait of Jolie and Belly. Jolie is an academic of Asian American Studies at UCLA. And that's their fur baby Belly. This is a portrait of Martin Crudo, and this is called Martin Cincuentanera. And Martin is an amazing punk rock, hardcore punk singer. They started a band called Los Crudos back in the 90s, and now they have a band called Limp Wrist, which is like queercore, hardcore band. And this was at their birthday party at Club Chico in East LA. And the way they're walking around with this big tulle dress and this big tulle skirt was almost like the ocean. And the way when they sing in the audience, the energy that they reciprocate from the audience and exchange that energy just reminded me of like the cycles of the ocean and the way water flows back and forth. And so that's where this piece came out of. And there's a lot of little like sequins and things glued into his floral arrangement that he's carrying around as well. And a lot of like vintage glass glitter, because there's a lot of different kind of kitsch references that I thought was important to include when referencing or when depicting somebody as like iconic as Martin Crudo. So that's where this painting came out of. And then too, with the video piece that's in this show, there is an ocean soundtrack, and I think it references that energy, the exchange of energies that a lot of shows, for me, at least punk shows, have. And that Martin definitely attests to that. So in the same way that I did the car piece, I did a series of Gothic lunchboxes. And back in the 90s, in high school, people would carry, like, especially if you're a goth or goth identifying, you would carry a little lunchbox with all the band stickers on your lunchbox. And that was kind of like your purse. And you didn't necessarily have your lunch in it, but you'd have like whatever your, I don't know, lipstick or black eyeliner or something. And when I got older and I'm contending with being an adult and losing all these sort of things that I held dear, like I necessarily don't think I have the courage to wear like a jacket with a bunch of patches on it now, or carry around a Gothic lunchbox. But I still admire and really respect and think that was such a special time to be able to do that back when I was younger. So I asked my friends if anyone still had their lunchboxes or Gothic lunchboxes, and a couple of them did. So I did this portrait of these Gothic lunchboxes. And so the Bikini Kill one is called Rudy's lunchbox. The Ministry one is Raquel's lunchbox. And they're just sort of these almost regressive, like nostalgic pieces. And I used gold again as a way to just like, the highest vibration is gold, right? And a way to just glorify and like long for that, or respect, or honor that history. This is work that sort of relates to this piece behind me now. And so when my grandfather, my aunt's husband, passed away, my mom's side, they're all survivors of the Japanese American internment camp. I wanted to do a piece for him. And coming out of grad school, the only exhibition opportunities really for a lot of people are these open call, like Day of the Dead shows in Los Angeles, or especially if you're Chicana, like that's sort of like the art scene in the Chicano art world is like Day of the Dead shows, to do an altar, do something like that. And so I did this series of work to honor people that had passed on, specifically my uncle and my other family members who are passing on, and taking that legacy with them. And so when the internment camps happened and someone passed away while in the camp, or if there was any sort of seminal life moment happening, they would have to make paper flowers for funerals or some sort of thing. So they would get together communally and people would make paper flowers. And when they excavated the cemeteries, they found the cemeteries at the Japanese American prison camps, they found these like glass jars full of wire remnants, or wire, what used to be a wreath with, so there's these wire shapes, and they used to be paper flower bouquets. So I did these drawings of paper flower bouquets, and I actually created a paper flower wreath to honor that history, and specifically my uncle. So when we're in the pandemic, and we still are, seeing like images of families being separated at the border, seeing kids in cages, seeing this, I just couldn't help but think about the parallels between the way different immigrant communities have been targeted throughout history, and the way we target communities now, or have in the beginning of time, as scapegoats, as otherizing, as fear-mongering, and the damage that does to communities and people and families. And thinking about that, I created this body of work, which is in relation to the prior body of work, specifically talking about the internment incarceration, but also this time incorporating now the immigrant detention centers that are still functioning today, and thinking about all the issues that are happening with Black Lives Matter and the police brutality that's sort of been in our faces and actually documented by cameras now, and what are some of the options, and what are some of the things that we can do to address that, and to think about abolitionism as a viable solution or beginning step. So for this exhibition, I'm doing a series of workshops in conjunction where we're making paper flowers, and we're using the same pattern from the archives that they found at the Manzanar, one of the Japanese American internment camp archives, and taking that paper flower pattern and having communal crafting workshops. And we're making these flowers, and I have a big installation in the next room where we will like attach the flowers and create a larger memorial piece to talk about this, to have the space to talk about these things. And I find that workshops are really great because not only communal crafting is a way to connect and dialogue with people, but it's also a way to share stories that are personal, that in turn become political, and to share that history and to share it with people. So the title of this piece is When This Is All Over, and in Spanish es Cuando se termine, which is the title of the exhibition. And with that, I think we should go into talking about the exhibition, and I'll bring in Amanda Kugliak to walk us around.
Shizu, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this first piece that we come to when we enter the gallery, and how that sets the mood for the exhibition.
Okay. So this is a portrait of Alfonso Gonzalez Jr., and he's a friend and fellow artist who comes from a lineage of sign makers, and that's apparent in his practice of painting. But also, this is a document of a photo I took at a backyard meeting regarding a backyard art show, and we were talking about ways that we could sidestep the institution and still have exposure as artists and what that would entail, and how do we go about all the logistics involved in creating a backyard art show. And Alfonso was wearing a Abolish ICE t-shirt that his friend had designed. And I think that speaks to the personal being political, being a portraiture artist, not separating people from their own identities, but honoring that connection to who they actually are, and not as anonymous people, but actually friends who I care about, who have their own histories and their own views. And so that's where this portrait comes in. And I also rendered the chair that was behind him in a Japanese washi paper as another way to bring in craft and to kind of undermine these hierarchies that are involved in different arts practices and materials.
Let's go look at another portrait where you really
Sure.
use some of these more untraditional elements.
Right. So this is a portrait of my friend Taco, who is in various different punk bands, as well as a go-go dancer at Club Scum, which is a kind of a queer art punk club that happened in East LA. That doesn't happen anymore since the pandemic. But I incorporated a lot of different collage elements, some vintage glitter, the wires from the telephone wires, the electricity wires that were in back of them. And this piece was taken in my backyard, a photo I took of Taco that happened in my backyard right at maybe a few months ago. And again, I'm finding that I'm having to stage more photo shoots to capture people and actually have to actively coordinate meetups to take photos and to document for paintings. Whereas before I would just go out to parties or go out to shows and see somebody I knew and like, oh, I love your outfit, let me take a photo of you. Now it's like, hey, Taco, can I take your photo if you come over? And this is a backyard, and it's like the social distancing that was involved with the backyard meetup instead of an intimate inside venue as well was happening. And Taco always wears these glasses too. So it was great to have them be able to pose for me.
I think what's so great about the paintings is they have all of these small details, and it's often that which we remember about people. So these portraits, which are about real people with real lives, have all of these intricacies and materiality of that, the textures that you incorporate in the paintings, for me, is what really connects us to, to their authentic quality. Let's go over here then and just look at a few other pieces.
Sure.
So this is work that references older work that you've done, but now you're showing in a new context. Can you touch upon that and the history of this work?
So these drawings I showed in the slideshow as well, they're actually from 2013, I believe, but I thought it was interesting to incorporate them with the older video piece because it becomes like this new almost juxtaposition that functions in contrast to the socially distant backyard portraits. And this closeness and intimacy that you have with people is something that we can't really achieve as easily now during the pandemic. And they're faded. They're like disappearing almost now. Like the really vibrant ballpoint pen ink has become like this almost like graphite looking gray. And the projection almost becomes this ghost on the sheet of like a memory of what our lives were like, and that the comradeship and the connection and the release of traumas that we could collectively engage with each other and enjoy has become this thing of the past, or some sort of otherworldly thing that we used to do. And how do we navigate and reconcile our new ways of socializing and connecting with people? And so that's where this piece comes in.
Do you see a connection between the convivial nature of this, or the gathering of what this work represents and documenting this experience at clubs and through music, with the crafting that the Japanese paper flower project involves?
Right. Yeah, there's a sort of the communalness of being in a show, dancing with people, and the collective catharsis release that you have and connection is definitely a parallel between communal crafting and being in a group and making something together. And it's like we a bouquet of flowers or an installation of flowers, or we're making a big, huge mosh pit together. And it's like this communal release of trauma and connection that I think is an underlying thread in all of the work.
And when you look at a piece like the fence piece with the paper flowers, which makes one think of the makeshift memorials that we're accustomed to seeing in urban settings, I think that also it kind of contradicts this idea of what a memorial is, or what a monument is, or what we pay homage to, that these feel like they're really rooted in real people and lives and what's happening in the moment.
Right. So there is, with this piece, there is a definite reference to memorializing and to memorial and mourning, definitely mourning people and the current state that we're in, and past traumas and past executive orders that we've been dealt, and past and current policy that has continually traumatized communities. And so it's this collective, ongoing altar and memorial to a collective sort of mourning that we're not out of yet. And I think that's where the title comes out of, when this is all over, because it's never truly over, and there's always going to be more traumas to endure and to unlearn and to break and to function with and learn how to deal with. And how do we move forward from that?
Thanks so much, Shizu. It's really wonderful to be able to host you at the Institute for the Humanities Gallery.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and for those of you who are close by, please do come in and see the exhibition in person. Thanks so much.